Hey everybody, and today we're going to be painting a heavy intercessor. Obviously a part of a squad of 5, but we're going to be focusing on this one today. We love painting Space Marines because Space Marines are easy to make look awesome because Space Marines are already awesome. So once this guy stops spinning, we're going to get right into it. Okay, we're going to be starting with the base today. Just a little bit odd because I wanted to attach it in a slightly different way. I'm using a toothpick stuck into his foot, and I'm going to glue it into the base. Now what I've done is I've given everything a zenithal primer already, so it's got a nice flat Vallejo black primer on it, and then just shot with some white from the top, and I'm spraying the entire base in Doom Bull brown. It's going to take a few coats because Doom Bull's a little bit thin, but we'll get there eventually. Then I'm going to give everything a fairly generous dry brushing with XV88 from Citadel. Slightly brighter. This is the kind of colour we're working towards. We're only using that Doom Bull brown for the deepest, darkest regions of this base, and we're working up some volume with the XV88. And then once that's dry, as you can see, I've got the other bases in the corner there because I like to work in batches, but I'm going to give this a slightly less generous dry brushing with Zamizi Desert for those highlights. I'm just using some Wraithbone dead quickly to pick out this tiny little skull that I've got on the base. Okay, so as you can see there's the Zenithal Prime, and I'm going to be shooting everything through the airbrush with Macragge Blue. You can do this with a dry brush, you can do it with a normal brush if you want to, but the benefit of the airbrush here is, firstly, obviously the speed, but secondly, I can be quite heavy with it on the bright white areas, and I can be very, very gentle with it, very, very loose in the darker areas underneath, so I get this really good shape to the armor. Then I'm going to quickly, just very lightly dust from the top through the airbrush with some Calgar Blue, just to give it a little bit of extra volume. Titanium white ink from Liquitex. I'm just getting the eye holes on the helmet. You can see all my helmets there stuck to my sticky cork. And Stormhawk Silver for some of the little details on the helmet. And the reason I use Stormhawk Silver is because I want the focus on the helmet, and it's a little bit brighter than Leadbelcher, because we obviously want the faces to be the first thing that stands out. I was originally going to give him a fleshy face, but then I realised, I thought, I'd rather have the helmet. Now, Bile Red, I love using contrast paint for these lenses because it just flows into the edges just a little bit easier, so I make less mistakes and have to come back and fix it less often. And it's a lovely and bright, the Bile Red, so using that for the lenses because that red and blue combination is just classic. Vallejo Black, slightly flatter than the Black Legion I use sometimes, but I want things to be a little flatter because I'm going to be coming and hitting this with a really heavy wash later, and I don't want it to be too shiny. So Vallejo Black here onto his gun, and also the under armor areas. So I've got to be very careful here because fixing any errors here on the armor after a dry brushing is going to be quite taxing. Wraithbone again, I'm just painting all the parchment on the purity seals, being very careful not to get anything on the armor. It's not unfixable, but it's better if we can avoid that. Mephiston Red with a nice bright red for the wax there on the purity seal. Again, take your time, just be careful. Titanium white ink, once again I'm just picking out some of these tiny details on his arm, and I'm going to cover this later with some Warpstone Glow, just as a nice little aside. Leadbelcher all over the metal, these big heavy tubes on his legs, and then I'm also going to pick out some of the details on his gun with that, and I'm also and a couple of other areas on his power pack. Again, a little bit darker than the Stormhawk Silver, so we get a good contrast. Retributor armor for all the little eagles and wings and gold bits and pieces, all of his little trinkets that are hanging off his waist. And then very carefully, obviously, for the shoulder pauldrons, probably the most nerve-wracking part for me of painting this model is getting into the shoulder pauldrons. I do find the wings and the skulls and the trinkets fairly straightforward, but I always get nervous painting those pauldrons because the slightest mistake and it really shows up on that blue shoulder pad. So yeah, just being very careful here. Make sure to thin that paint so it gets into all the nooks and crannies with no real problems. And it might need a second coat if you thin it down a little too much, but don't worry about it. Just be careful when you're applying it. And there you can see, very, very carefully, just using the tip of the brush, well loaded but not overloaded brush, so we get a good flow. and just using the tip of the brush to draw those edges in so they're not accidentally touching the shoulder pad. And don't be afraid to move your model around, make it a little bit easier to get the angles that you need. I'm using Rhinox hides, nice deep brown for all the leather. There's a little gun holster here, and there's a little area of belt underneath his back. But I'm also going to paint the strap for his gun in this Rhinox hide. I'm going to take the unusual step later of actually giving this some edge highlighting, which I don't normally do. But I just feel that when I come back for the wash later, it'll end up really wiping out some of the shape. So I want a little bit of highlight underneath it. Ryclone Flesh Shade, I'm going in there for all of the gold. Give it all a little coat, even the shoulder pauldrons, but especially here you can see letting it flow into the recesses, zoomed in, a little bit blurry, but you can see it's just flowing into the recesses there and giving all of those golden areas a lovely bit of shape, which is what we want. We don't want to lose any of those details. Good old Nuln Oil for all of the metal areas. Nice healthy wash of this. Just make sure it doesn't pull too much on the higher areas so we get some highlight as well. There we go. Now XV88, as I said, just going to quickly pick out some of the higher areas on this strap, and I do actually get some of the edges of the leather pouches on his belt, because in a second I'm going to give this a really heavy oil wash, and I want these little highlighted areas to come through. So I've got Lamp Black from Winsor & Newton and mineral oil, and it's fairly thin, but what I've done here is purposely I've not made it completely perfectly smoothly mixed together, so there are some little lumps, and what we get then is we get these little tiny patches after we wick away the excess, just little patches where there's little blotches of black, and it gives a nice weathered effect, like a dirty effect. Be careful here that we're patting it away and we're not rubbing too hard on the paint, because otherwise we could strip away the paint job that we've done. So just being careful to pat and press rather than scrape with the paper towel there. And we lose a little bit of the detail because it was, like I say, it was quite heavy. So just a very, very gentle, very, very small area, dry brush with a small brush of Calgar blue, just to bring back some of those highlights. And then Vallejo black going around the edges of the base, just to neaten it up. You can paint this any colour you want, you can match it to the base if you want, but and I'm using a super fine marker just to get into the purity seals. It's a different model that you can see me doing it on there. And then I'm using some pigment paint, sorry, some pigment powder, just to tie his feet in to the base. The base is just made out of a big lump of cork that I tore up from an old, I think it was like a pan mat or something like that. And everything's glued together. The base is just made out of some, like I say, just some cork, all glued together. And I've got a toothpick through his foot and into the base just to give it some extra rigidity and make it super, super sturdy. And I'll be doing another video on basing in the future. But in the meantime, give me a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.